You are listening to Prophet Pearls with Nehemia Gordon and Keith Johnson, exploring biblical prophecy for yesterday, today, and tomorrow.
Welcome back to Prophet Pearls, exploring biblical prophecy for yesterday, today, tomorrow. This is Keith Johnson along with Nehemia Gordon, face to face, doing whatever it takes in the land of Israel. And I'm sick. But I'm having a great time, Nehemia. I'll tell you something, I feel terrible. But again, when we start discussing the Word of God, it gets pretty exciting for me. We're actually going to be discussing something in 2 Kings 7:3, but I'm not going to play by the rules.
Okay.
I'm not going to play by the rules, folks. There's no way we're going to start in 2 Kings chapter 7, verse 3. Why? You tell me why, Nehemia? Because I have to talk about the few verses before. Yeah. How did they not talk about the context of what Elisha does? So I know officially, folks, that this, and first of all, let me say to our Prophet Pearl partners, the Maccabees. Maccabees, if you're listening, thank you so much for sponsoring this. We are so thankful for those like you that they're hanging there with us, and for all of those that are listening and commenting on nehemiaswall.com and bfainternational.com. We're supposed to actually start at 7, verse 3. I won't allow it. Okay. Tradition says that it's 7:3. I'm going to break tradition, and I just want to read the first few verses of chapter 7, verses 1 and 2, and again, it sets the context. Elisha said, "Hear the word of Yehovah. This is what Yehovah says. About this time tomorrow, a seah of flour will sell for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria. The officer on whose arm the king," and this is why I like this. We talked about the officer whose king leans on the arm. We talked about in the section that we just did.
Yeah.
Here's this. The officer on whose arm the king was leaning said to the man of God, "Look, even if Yahweh should open the floodgates of heaven, could this happen?" And then Elisha says, sticks his chest out, "You will see it with your own eyes, but you will not eat any of it." Now we can start the section.
Yeah.
So there were 4 men with leprosy at the entrance.
And the reason that's important to start there is because it's a prophecy, and the story we're about to read is a fulfillment.
And
of
how
the prophecy.
how can we know that? I mean,
it's really strange.
Yeah.
And here I want to just reiterate. These portions, they're based on certain traditions, and they're supposed to correspond to different things in the Torah. And obviously, the thing it corresponds to in the Torah here is we're in the portion of Metzora, which is Leviticus 14:1 to 15:33, which is about leprosy. And here it's a story about the lepers at the gates of Samaria during the siege of Samaria by the Arameans, by the Syrians.
Yeah.
And
can I just stop you and say thanks for taking off that hat? Folks, we're in the basement of a place here. Nehemia's got us. It's freezing outside, and he had on this hat. There was no way I was going to make it through Prophet Pearls with that hat.
What's wrong with my hat? I love my hat.
I wish I could take a picture of you with the hat.
We will take a picture of the hat.
I want people. Anyway. So he took the hat off.
Now you've got to take your hat off.
Okay.
All right. With the 2 baldies. So anyway, and that's appropriate because Elisha was a baldy too.
That's right.
So So now that we've spoken about the hat,
no, you're talking about the tradition.
Oh, so the tradition is to start it in verse 3. And one of the things I hear in these, I'll listen to these debates between the rabbi and the Christian, the rabbi and the pastor, and they'll be debating, the Jewish side and the Christian side. And one of the things I came to this conclusion years ago, that truth is not found in these debates, because everybody, their objective is, I want to prove my side.
Right.
And it's not about we're looking for truth together. It's I want to prove that I'm right and you're wrong. And so there's many things that a person will not admit or not state because they're trying to prove themselves and not search for the truth. And what I want to do is humble myself before the creator of the universe and come look for truth, even if I'm proven wrong, especially if I'm proven wrong, because then I'll have the truth. And one of the things the rabbis will say, rightfully so from my perspective, is you Christians, you take these verses out of context. And then here we are doing this rabbinical tradition of the prophets, reading the prophets and trying to understand them in their history, language, and context. And the context of the prophecy is ripped out.
Exactly.
Verses 1 to 2 is key. It's the prophecy that's fulfilled in verses 3 and on. So I'm glad you broke with tradition and read the prophecy that now is going to be fulfilled.
Every once in a while, I'm going to do that in Nehemia. But one of the things that folks, we didn't do this in the last show because we got all fired up and whatever. We didn't talk about the ministries, and I know there are people who listen to this each time. But
fast forward.
We have to. I've got to have a ministry minute right now.
Go ahead.
We are in a really significant time in by the time that people are listening to this right now, Nehemia, we will have either determined, it will have been determined whether we're in the biblical year starting in, I think the date was around March.
March 21st.
Yeah, and then, of course, by the time they're listening to this, we would have already celebrated Pesach. And the Feast of Unleavened Breads. Yeah, so I guess I don't know how you want to, we jump right into this and not talk a little bit about what time of year it is. I mean, I was really shocked when you said the date for yet the last deal, and I'm trying to figure out what happened with the days. How did we get into wherever we are in April? And we missed a section, or
no, we just did a lot of episodes.
We just did a lot of episodes. Okay,
so I think this is our 27th or 28th episode.
Okay, so
this is the 28th episode we're doing.
Yeah. So one of the things that's been really interesting is to actually being in the land of Israel. I call it God's clock headquarters, where we get a chance to see both in heaven and earth the connection and understanding of what time it is. And you will have by now, we'll have already searched and gone through the process of seeing whether the barley is Aviv and celebrating the beginning of the month, the new moon. And then by the time we're doing this, we would actually be after the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, that sounds right. By the way, just for invite people to go do some homework and read the full context here, which begins actually in chapter 2 Kings chapter 6 verse 24 through 33 is setting up the siege of Samaria. And then, then the prophecy of Elisha appears in chapter 7, verses 1 to 2, which is when in the context of the siege has already begun, and it's really in a bad place. The people are on the verge of starvation. In fact, some of them have gone over the verge of starvation. They're eating their children. Right. That's how bad things are.
Yeah. Well, the reason I brought this up as far as the time is that there's an entire series that we have at the BFAinternational.com. It's actually in the premium content library. It's called The Time Will Tell. And what I like about that series, it's been played all over the world and been on international television, and now it's in our premium content library for people who really want to kind of understand how it is that we came to the place where we are understanding what time it is according to the biblical reckoning of time versus the how can I say it, the many other possibilities and ways that people keep time. But what I love about that series is actually letting people see with their own eyes the process. And one of the most favorite episodes of the 10 was the actual episode where we went and looked for the barley. And understanding how that works and knowing what time it is and being able to see with my own two eyes and people seeing with their own two eyes and opening their Bible and understanding why this is. This isn't something that's been created by some group of people who say, hey, let's come up with a new way to determine what time it is. It's rather taking the text, understanding the text, and then applying it. So I want to encourage people to do that. You can go to BFAinternational.com. And on the front page, you actually can watch the first episode of every single series that's there. Well, you can just watch that whole thing and discern for yourself. But that's just one of the things I wanted to lift up to people is that this is a time of year where understanding what time it is important. And that's a series that really can help people do that. So go to BFAinternational.com, front page, and you get a chance to see that information.
Yeah, and my ministry is McCore Hebrew Foundation. You can go and find out about my teachings at nehemiaswall.com. That's nehemiaswall.com. And don't forget to sign up for my free newsletter to get your regular updates. And I just want to give a shout out there to all the people who, and I'm saying this by faith because we're pre-recording it, but I'm recording this before the Aviv Search, but I want to shout out for all the people who supported the Aviv Search and made it possible and gave donations and support through prayer and through finances that allowed us to be able to go out and look at the barley and examine it and do it in a proper way. And you started off reading in verse 1. It talked about there was this price. The prices here. It was a shekel of flour, which actually there in Hebrew it's the wheat flour, and a se'ah of flour for a shekel, and 2 se'ah of barley for a shekel. And what you see is the price of barley. Even in when it was at its very cheapest, was 50% of the price of wheat. Wow! And that's because barley was less valuable in ancient times, and that's because the barley was actually a technical reason that it's difficult to remove the shell from the barley. It's and so you're getting like a lot of kind of what you might call it's very coarse, right? Yeah. The way they ate it in ancient times, to the point where some people actually say, where it speaks about bread of affliction in Scripture, that it's not just unleavened, but it was made from barley. Wow! That was implied in that phrase, bread of affliction. because it's less, less edible, less yummy. Anyway, so thank you for all you people who have stood with me on the wall and helped me empower people with information by going out there and finding out what the barley is, and it's because of you. I'm able to do this because of you, and so I want to just say thank you.
Awesome. Well, and that's why when I see the word barley, I'm like, we got to at least we're so fast in doing this, and really, it really is. It isn't speed study, but it definitely is speed production. We had to do a lot of pre-work in order to be able to do this, but we're really
I don't know
trying
about you, but I spent quite a bit of time preparing each section, knowing that when we came here in Jerusalem, we'd have a short time to record it, and so everything that went into it had to be done beforehand.
Absolutely. And let me say this, that there are so many people that are a part of what we're doing, both the folks that do the editing, people that help us prepare, people that help us look through what's going on, folks that are doing artwork. I mean, I just have to say this whole Prophet Pro process with the partners, the people that are behind the scenes, everything that's happening. I don't know how many people if we were to count it, but it really is an amazing and humbling experience to have so many people put their hands to the plow so that we can do this work. So thanks to everybody. And again, when I saw the word barley, I thought we had to at least address the time of year. So now let's go to the section that's out of context. Now, there were 4 men with leprosy at the entrance of the gate. Now, let me stop right quick and ask a simple question. Oftentimes, people are going to have a note in the English Bible that's going to give a note about the word leprosy. And I just want to go ahead and have you do me a favor and check on the computer on this, Nehemia. In like our example, I'm looking at the NIV here. It says, now there were 4 men with leprosy, and it goes down to the letter C. It says the Hebrew word is used for various diseases affecting the skin, not necessarily leprosy, also in verse 8. So when they say that, the first thing you want to do is find out, well, what word are we talking about? Since leprosy happens to be the issue that we were dealing with in the previous section, in this section, I would just ask you a question. Is the leprosy of the last section the same word that we're using here for these men?
In the Hebrew, it's the same word, and
Absolutely.
the word is the noun. The name of the disease is tsara'at, and someone who has tsara'at is called a Metzora, and plural is Metzoraim. So these are Metzoraim. They're people who have tsara'at.
Awesome.
What is tsara'at? So when we say leprosy in English, we're referring to a very specific disease, which I forget what it is. Is that Hansen's disease or something like that? It's one of those things. And this is a great story. There's actually a place in Jerusalem. I don't know if you've ever been there.
Yep.
Which
not far from here. Actually.
Yeah, where they had lepers who were living there.
Yep.
And I'm talking about in the 20th century.
Yep.
And it was a communicable disease, and there was no cure. And so the government of Israel made a deal with them. They deprived them of their freedom, and these guys didn't have a choice. They said, we're going to give you a place to live for the rest of your life and a monthly salary, but you have to agree never to leave this place. And if you don't agree, it's too bad. We're going to lock the gates. And since then, what we call in the Western world leprosy has been healed, and those people still live in that place for free. And this is prime real estate in Israel. And they still get their monthly check because they said they accepted the deal. But back then, whether leprosy is Hansen's disease or something else, it's hard to say. But it definitely is this word sarat. It was understood definitely as not just a physical ailment, but a spiritual ailment. And where we can see that is where, and I'm sure we talked about this in the original Prophet Pearls, where we can see that, or the original Torah Pearls, where we can see that is that Moses sticks his hand into his cloak and he takes it out and it's white, full of leprosy, and and then we hear about Naaman who has leprosy and he's healed by dipping himself 7 times in the Jordan River.
And
Miriam had leprosy when she sinned. So we've got a bunch of references to leprosy. What exactly is it? It's hard to believe it's just a physical disease, because if that were the case, what would be the significance of all these rituals of spiritual purification that we read about in Leviticus?
So I encourage people to make sure that they go to the original Torah Pearls. Both sites have the connection there. We did that over at
nehemiaswall.com and bfainternational.com.
Yeah, we did that over. It took a full year. And I have to say again, what's really nice about this is that it's taking a huge effort to get these done, but once they're done and once they're edited and once they're up, people can actually use this on a regular basis. That they can go to the Torah Pearls, they can go to Prophet Pearls, and between the two, you have over 3 hours, probably about 3 hours of information that people can go through and look through and continue.
And by the way, the fact that they're lepers is significant because that's why they're outside the gates. Lepers were ritually unclean and would not have been allowed inside of the city because they would have, we think in modern times, they would have spread the disease, but the thinking back then was, This isn't exactly a physical disease; it's a spiritual disease, and when you're ritually unclean, then you're going to be put out. You're not going to come into contact with someone who's going to make you ritually unclean, especially in this leprosy case where it can spread.
And it's interesting, the first paragraph here. We don't, like you said, we're trying not to go verse by verse, but just for the overall, the idea is that these guys are in a pretty hopeless, helpless situation where they're saying, "Look, we've got leprosy. We're outside the gate. There's famine on the inside of the gate. There's no food. We're going to die. Let's just go ahead and take our chances and go over to the Arameans." And if we go to the Arameans and surrender, if they spare us, man, we're better off. They've at least got food.
What do we got to lose?
Yeah, but if they kill us, then we die. It's over. And so at verse 5 it says, at dusk. Why at dusk? They got up and went to the camp of the Arameans.
Here it says at dusk?
That's what it says, at dusk.
So the word in Hebrew is neshef, and neshef means early in the morning, before sunrise, when it's still dark, but there's already a little bit of light.
But why do you think they did it at dusk? Come on, you know the answer.
You tell me. I don't know the answer.
They can't do it out in daylight that they're going over to the Arameans.
Oh, because they'll get shot by their own people.
Yeah, they've got to go. They got to sneak over there.
Okay, maybe. Who knows? But it's early in the morning.
Yeah, it's early in the morning, and when they reached the edge of the camp, not a man was there for. And this is where the revival music comes in. For Yehovah had caused the Arameans to hear the sound of chariots and horses and a great army, so that they said to one another, "Look, the king of Israel has hired the Hittite and the Egyptian kings to attack us." So they got up and fled in the dusk, early in the morning, and abandoned their tents and their horses and donkeys. They left the camp as it was and ran for their lives. When I read that, I think, why did they say the Hittites and the Egyptians, that they went and hired them? We have examples where they went to different
right.
Places and said, okay, can you help us fight here? Can you help us fight there? And sometimes I have to just say it's really been interesting to try to figure out geopolitically what's happening at a specific time. So,
well, and Aram, or today's Syria, Aram Damascus, was sandwiched between the Hittite Empire and the Egyptian Empire, and so these are the big guys on the block that they're afraid of. They're not afraid. Oh, the king of Judah is going to come and attack us.
Who cares about that?
We'll beat them.
Yeah.
But where the Ammonites are coming. No, they're not concerned with that, but they are concerned. They're terrified of Egypt and the Hittites. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really interesting. Here's the question I ask myself when I read something like this. Mm-hmm. So the lepers go into the camp. How do they know this? How do they know that why the Arameans, why the Syrians fled? And I think the answer is very clearly they don't know this. This is information the narrator is providing. Mm-hmm. In other words, the prophet who's recording this information for us and presenting it to us, he's telling us the lepers knew that the Arameans had fled, but they didn't know why, and here's why. And the reason why is because Yehovah, performed this miracle. He caused the sound to take place. He caused them to hear the sound of chariots and horses, and they said, wow, this must be some big army. Mm-hmm. And look, this actually reminds me of the story of the Assyrians. Yep. So that's in 1 Kings 19:35 and Isaiah 37:36. Go look those up, please, and read those stories. It's a story about the Assyrians being camped against Jerusalem, and they wake up in the morning and everybody's gone, and there's 185,000 who are dead or something like here. Let me read the verse. 2 Kings 19:35 says, and it came to pass that night, an angel of Yehovah went out, and he smote the camp of Assyria, 185,000. Mm-hmm. And they woke up early in the morning, and behold, they were all dead corpses. And the same thing appears in Isaiah 37:36. And now that's only part of the story, because earlier in the story, let's see, where is this? Yeah, earlier, let's see, where is this? 2 Kings 19:35. All right, so sorry, earlier in the story in 2 Kings 19:9, Rav Shakeh, who is the general, he hears a rumor that Tirhaka, the king of Cush, is on his way to fight, and so he's under all this pressure to besiege Jerusalem. And during the siege, he finally ends up with the angel smiting the camp. But it was a similar sort of thing, that they heard this rumor that the enemy's coming, and so they've got to either flee or get things done really quickly. What's interesting about that story, and I'm going to talk about this just really briefly because we are not going to read that in the Prophet Pearls, but the story in 2 Kings 19 of Rav Shakeh and Sancheriv and the siege of Jerusalem, it's really interesting because that story in a form appears in two other major sources. One is it's alluded to in the Assyrian documents, and in the Assyrian documents they talk about how they captured all these cities in Israel, in Judah, and it says, And Jerusalem was locked up like a bird in a cage, meaning we actually didn't capture Jerusalem. We just sieged it. He doesn't mention the defeat because no ancient king and even many modern kings wouldn't mention that. But they do mention that, Jerusalem was besieged. And then it's mentioned actually by Herodotus, who is a Greek historian. He actually mentions that there's a plague that wipes out the Assyrians. So and he gets the story a little bit distorted. He thinks it has to do with some pagan deity from Egypt causing it. But it's pretty cool that here we have the story. It appears it appears in Isaiah and Kings, and then appears in Assyrian sources in a form and in a Greek source in Herodotus. So it's pretty cool.
It's funny. I was reading, when I read this immediately, it's like when I think about this, okay, and I'm glad you brought up the issue of the narrator, the person that's writing this. But one of the things that really came to mind right away is the story in 2 Samuel chapter 5.
Yeah.
In 5:23, David inquired of Yehovah, he said, "You shall not go directly up, circle around behind them, and come at them in front of the balsam trees. And it shall be when you hear the sound of marching in the tops of the balsam trees, then you shall act promptly, for then Yehovah will give out before you and strike the army of the Philistines." And it says, goes on, there's a parallel with that also in 1 Chronicles 14. But what's so cool about it is that the sound, this idea of him using the sound of the army, and like in this situation, they heard the sound of this great army, and so they said to one another, "Behold, the king of Israel has hired against us." And so they hear it. They don't see it, but they hear it, and as a result, they respond.
And we have another story in the stories of Elisha where they actually see the army.
Exactly.
It's something we've talked about before. And it's the the army of Yehovah. And that also reminds me, of course, of where Joshua is outside of Jericho and he sees the South Tzava Yehovah, the officer of the army of Yehovah.
Yep.
Basically a general of the angels.
Yep.
This is pretty cool. These armies of angels is something that the Tanakh doesn't really go into great detail about, but they exist.
Yeah.
And they're there. Yeah.
So it says they got up and they fled at the dusk and abandoned their tents. The men, and this is a story that's, I don't want to say it's kind of funny, but I mean, the story is that these men who had the leprosy reach the edge of the camp, enter in one of the tents. They go to one of the tents.
Yeah.
They eat and they drink. They carry away silver, gold, and clothes, and went off and they hid them. So it's like I see, it's like a little, what are those little things called that they take the stuff and they go and dig it up and put it in the dirt and hide it. So
like squirrels,
like little squirrels or whatever,
or hiding the acorns.
By the way, you know what? I got to tell you something really interesting.
Yeah,
I asked Andrea about this. I'm presently in Shanghai, and I have to say it again. Amazing doors are opening for the Word of God, but one of the things that I have a really hard time with there is I never see any animals. No, hold on. There's 26 million people there. Yeah. I never see a squirrel. I never see a cat. I barely see birds. What's that about?
They eat them all. It's not a joke.
So anyway, they go and they go in and they go into the tent. They get this stuff. They take it like a little squirrel and they hide it. And then it says they came back again and they went into another tent and took some things from it. And then they go and they hide it again. And then I don't know if it's them together as a group. It says they said this to one another. This is not right. This is a day of good news. And what word is that? This is
Besorah.
This is a day of good news.
Right. And for those who don't know, the Hebrew word for Gospels is Besorot.
Yes,
one of them is called the Besorah of Matthew. It's good news. It's a day of good tidings, of a good announcement.
Yes, that's amazing. Saying. And look at what's the great news? The good news is
these were evangelists. Is what we're trying to say.
They were about to
to evangelize. By the way,
those
means
who
to
bring new good news.
Right. Announce. So the word evangelion means good news in Greek.
Absolutely.
So these guys were about to evangelize the good news of the defeat of the Assyrians.
Exactly. And we're keeping it to ourselves. You can't keep the good news to yourself. Yeah. You can't keep the good news to yourself. You got to share the good news, Nehemia. And so they're sharing the good news. They go and they share it. And if we wait until daylight, punishment will overtake us. They realize, there's a social responsibility that we not only enjoy it for ourselves, but now there's more here for us than just for this. These people are suffering back there. We've got to go bring this good news.
So tell me, Keith, is this a picture of the church, or the church a band of lepers who have discovered that there's the food of God and they've got to share it with the world? Is that what you're trying to tell me?
I don't know anything about. All I know is that there's a few that have all the money and they've got to share it with everybody else. And so this is an example of what's got to happen. You can't just have a few, the 1%ers. They got to share the good 1%.
Wait, back to the Keynesian agenda. All right.
You folks, in the midst of Prophet Pearls, we get into these, would you call them creative tension, or is it discussions?
No, it's absolutely creative tension.
It's creative tension?
I believe in the whole concept of the road to serfdom, and, I'm concerned that, I don't want to be a slave of the government, and you think the government should come and redistribute wealth.
I don't think that, Nehemia. I'm not saying that.
And I think the situation here was a little different because there's more wealth than they can possibly consume.
They can't consume.
And in the meantime, there's people who are starving to death, and actually this has kind of just fallen to them from nowhere. They didn't earn this. They didn't work at it.
Yeah.
And they're saying, wait a minute, we've got to go tell. There's people starving to death right now.
Exactly.
And we have more food than we need. We've even squirreled away food for the future. We've got to share this with people.
And I think what I really wanted to say about it that I thought was interesting is that they knew that there was something. Look at what they say. It says, if we wait until daylight, if we don't tell about this good news, punishment's going to overtake us.
It actually says in Hebrew, iniquity will overtake us.
Yeah. Excellent.
And they realized the longer they waited, the more people in the city would starve from the sea.
And I just think that's amazing. That's an amazing, that one little verse, that one little phrase.
But I agree with you that this is social responsibility. And what I love about it is that these are the people who are deciding, hey, wait a minute, we've got to do something to help other people. It's not that the government said, oh, whoa, lepers, you're not allowed to have that. I'm going to take that from you and give it to somebody else. These are the people deciding, even a leper who'd been rejected by society, who is left to fend for himself, has the human nature, innate sense that I've got to help other people. I don't need the government to tell me to do that. I know to do that.
And it's interesting too. Last week we were talking about this slave girl, who basically went beyond her place of comfort and shared, the good news that there's a prophet in the land in a bad situation, but thinking about others. Yeah. Here, these people are in a bad situation. Amen. They were the outcasts. Now they're going to go and be the ones that bring this great news.
Amen.
So they went and called out to the city gatekeepers and told them, "We went into the Aramean camp, and not a man was there, not a sound of anyone. Only tethered horses and donkeys in the tents just left that they were there. The gatekeepers shouted the news, and it was reported within the palace." I think it's funny that they didn't say, "We went into the Aramean camp, and not a man was there, not a sound of anyone, and there's gold, and there's food, and there's clothes." Right. They didn't go too far. Look, they just basically said, "Listen, just want to let you guys know to get it off our conscience. There's nobody there." I just think that's kind of funny.
Yeah.
So anyway, but then it says, they shouted, then the gatekeepers shouted the news. What's the word there? They shouted the news. This is what it says in the NASB. It's verse 11.
Yeah, I don't see anything about shouting the news.
You don't see anything about shouting the news?
No. It says Vayikra Shoarim, and the gatekeepers called or announced, and they Vayagidu Beit HaMelech Pnima, and they told it to the house of the king inward.
So I tried
inside the palace.
So I tried to slip something by a couple of the two witnesses. I got two witnesses that keep me accountable. So I tell these two witnesses, I said, "Do you know where the word news comes from? Do you know where the word news comes from?"
In English?
Yeah.
Because it's something new?
No, it's the word news represents
Where does it come
north,
from?
east, west, and south. That's what the word news means. In other words, when they came up with the word news, it means shouting it to the north, the east, the west, and the south. And I ran with this. And the two witnesses, they don't go for this stuff. They like to check stuff. And they checked it and come to find out that I was just making up a bunch of hogwash. You know where I heard that from?
Sounds like
someone in China told me about that,
really?
and I believed it. I was about to do a whole teaching.
You're a friar.
I'm a friar.
Always check your sources. Yeah. Yeah. No.
Anyways,
so
they shout. They announce.
But what I do like is the word here, Vayikra, which means to call, to announce, but also means to proclaim. And what I think when I hear this word, and where you're getting shouting good news, is we have in Leviticus 23 we hear about the appointed times, and the word is Mikra Kodesh, which has been translated holy convocation, but really what it means is holy proclamation. And how do we know that? It says Ukiratem, and you will proclaim them as holy proclamations. So one of the aspects of the feasts of the appointed times in Leviticus 23 is not just to observe them and to keep them, but to proclaim them. So here they're proclaiming. The gatekeepers are proclaiming. That's a more literal translation.
So now this is just a little simple thing that when I slow down to read it, just makes me ask another question. In verse 12 it says, "The king got up," and in my English translation it says, "The king got up in the night."
Okay.
And said to his officers. Now, go back a couple verses earlier. They said, "We're not doing right. This is a day of good news, and we are keeping it to us. If we wait until daylight, punishment will overtake us. Let's go at once and report this to the royal palace." And this is still happening in the darkness, or in the whatever we said earlier.
Well, no, I don't think so.
You think it's the next day?
I think they spent all day pillaging the camp, and they're laying their stuffed to in their faces. and they're realizing, oh boy, we better not wait until sunrise.
So it was 24 hours.
Or it was probably about 12 or 16 hours later. 12 hours later.
Okay.
Like that.
So in the nighttime, after they've got their 2 places with their gold and their silver and everything's hidden away,
Yeah.
the king gets up in the night and says to his officers, I will tell you what the Arameans have done to us. They know we are starving. So they've left the camp. It's a ruse. It's a trick. And they've hidden in the country. They're thinking they will surely come out, and then we will take them alive and get into the city. One of the officers answered, have some men take 5 of the horses that are left in the city. There's still horses left in the city.
Yeah.
People are starving.
Yeah.
5 of the horses left in the city. Their plight will be like that of all the Israelites left here. Yes, they will only be like all the Israelites who are doomed. So let us send them to find out what happened. So they selected, can I continue? I'm going to tell the story. They selected 2 chariots with their horses, and the king sent them after the Aramean army. He commanded the drivers, go and find out what happened. They followed them as far as the Jordan, and they found the whole road strewn with the clothing and equipment the Arameans had thrown away in their headlong flight. So the messengers returned and reported to the king. Then the people went out and plundered the camp of the Arameans. So a seah of flour sold for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley sold for a shekel, as Yehovah had said. Now here's my point. Mm-hmm. If we don't read the first 2 verses, this verse means nothing. If we don't, in other words, the prophecy is fulfilled where Elisha said, this is what's going to happen. If we don't read that and we just come to this, we just move on. There's supposed to be excitement right now. This is what the word of Yehovah was, that this was going to actually affect the economy.
Can I ask us to jump back to the previous? I know I assigned this as homework to people.
You signed it as homework.
We've got to go back to 2 Kings chapter 6.
Yep.
And read the first 2 verses of this story, which is verses 24 and 25. Can you?
This is so illegal. I mean, we're
completely out of the section, but we've got to.
Okay.
We've got to. So, I mean, talk about losing the context. If we don't have these 2 verses, we're missing a major part of the story. Mm-hmm. So it's verses, let's see, is it 24 to 25? So let me read you from the JPS. It says here, sometime later, King Ben-Hadad of Aram mustered his entire army and marched upon Samaria and besieged it. This is the beginning of the story.
Right.
Verse 25, there was a great famine in Samaria. Why is there a famine? Because they can't bring food into the city. There's no commerce. Mm-hmm. There was a great famine in Samaria, and the siege continued until a donkey's head sold for 80 shekels of silver and a quarter of a kav of dove's dung for 5 shekels.
What do you mean it says seed pods?
It says what now?
It says seed pods and a quarter of a cab of seed pods. I don't know about this.
No, it's dove poop. So that's a different discussion. But here's an interesting. This is absolutely fascinating. We have an early example here of an awareness of the concept of supply and demand.
Yes,
which is a central concept in Western economies. And the idea was because the siege is so bad, people are going to pay 80 shekels for a donkey's head. A donkey's head isn't kosher. It's not even really anything to eat. I mean, a donkey's not that I've tried, but nobody wants to eat a donkey's head.
Nobody eats a donkey's
head. Not even in China. I don't think they. And here it's 80 shekels of silver, and a quarter of a kav of something from doves, whatever that is 5 shekels. Like these are astronomical prices. Why? Because supply and demand. You can't eat silver, but you can eat these things. They may not taste good. Mm-hmm. And here, then we understand the significance of the prophecy in 2 Kings chapter 7, which is really only a few verses later. He's saying your prices are so bad. He's saying, guess what's going to happen? There's going to be the prices are going to completely switch to the point where you're going to get an entire se'ah of fine flour for a shekel and 2 se'ah of barley flour for a shekel in the gates of Samaria. And the guy hears this and he says, you're nuts. People are buying a donkey's head for 80 shekel. You're telling me we're going to get a whole kav for 1 shekel?
Exactly.
Our whole se'ah, that's impossible. He doesn't believe it. And the point is, if Yehovah says it, you better believe it. But I think this is fascinating, the whole economic side of it, this idea of supply and demand, that supply and demand actually having a function in prophecy. Mm-hmm. That's really cool.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you know it or not, but I was actually the one that told the folks that oil was going to be at $50 a barrel, below $50 a barrel.
Is that what it is? I don't even know.
What do you mean? You don't know about the whole thing with oil?
What is it? How much is
oil? Was over 100 in oil now is they're saying oil is going to be you don't know about what's going on with oil.
Tell me what's going on with oil.
Oil's going through, it's a crash. Oil's down so low.
The price is going down.
And in fact, Netanyahu made mention to it because of oil being where it is in the economy and how that affects Tehran. But really, the point is, I really am glad you brought that up, because there is this idea that I just think it's amazing that God would have his hands, if I can say this, that the prophecy would affect the economy like that.
Yeah.
That literally that was the prophecy. It was an economic.
It's an economic prophecy.
It's an economic prophecy. It's like a person standing there saying, "The Dow is going to be at 12,000 such and such, and it's going to." Of course, I never said that, but
right.
The point is that you see that kind of thing, and what's happening presently, if it's still happening at the time of the recording here, is that it's been a major economic shift. The amount of money that's been quote unquote lost in the value of oil. They said that one of the reasons that the king of Saudi Arabia died. He said it was because
he was heartsick because of the loss.
No, I mean
value?
billions of dollars. Literally, the amount of money.
Yeah, I didn't know anything about that. Wow.
How can you not know anything about?
Yeah, I don't listen to the news.
Okay,
it's all lies anyway.
Let's move on, because this.
Well, yeah.
Okay.
No, I just think it's amazing here. So let's just state the obvious, and I'm sorry for those who it's just so obvious to you. But why is there this devaluation so much of? You could say it's a devaluation of the shekel, meaning, or is it the other way around? No, it's yeah, I'm not an economics person.
Yep.
But basically,
the supply and demand.
Right, the supply. So the supply has gone up, and why has it gone up? Because the Arameans abandoned all their stuff.
Yeah.
So anybody who went out could go get as much flour as he wanted. Well, who's going to buy it if you can get it for free? And maybe there are people who can buy it.
This also might be obvious, Nehemia, but it's funny when I read the story and it says that they went into the tents and they got gold and they got silver and they got clothes.
Right.
You got to think to yourself, well, was that? Obviously, that wasn't how it started. They obviously are on a campaign. They've already begun to accumulate. These armies have accumulated gold and silver from other places. They're doing their next thing.
Right.
And instead, like they go in and what they'd gotten from somewhere else now, they actually left. I mean, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So, but now I want to get to this, if I can get to this, because it says here, he tells, Elijah tells him, I'm glad we went back to that section, tells him this is going to happen. They go and they find out. They select the 2 chariots. Let me just go to the whole thing. Verse 16, it says in verse 16, then the people went out, and they thrown around their head like the messengers returned and reported to the king. Then the people said, enough is enough. The people went out and plundered the camp of the Arameans. So a seah of flour sold for a shekel again. 2 seahs of barley had sold for a shekel, as Jehovah had said. Now here comes this part.
Verse 17.
Now the king had put the officer on whose arm he leaned in charge of the gate. So he tells his officer, now listen now, okay, you're in charge of the gate. Now, maybe this is just me, okay?
Yeah.
Maybe this is just me, but what kind of job is that to give your guy? They put him in charge of the gate, and what happens? Now, and people don't understand this. I want to talk about yesterday's, today, and tomorrow. You probably don't know this because of the news, but it says here that the people trampled him in the gateway, and he died just as the man of God Elisha had foretold, when the king said to the king, about this time tomorrow, a seah of flour will sell for a shekel. Basically, Elisha said, look, you're never going to see it. You're actually going to die.
Well, you're going to see it, but you won't benefit from it.
You won't benefit from it.
Right.
Now, you know what? This just a couple weeks ago, just about a month and a half ago, Nehemia, this actually happened in China.
Really?
In China on the New Year, which was the New Year, not the Chinese New Year, the Gregorian New Year.
Yeah.
What happened was they went into the Shanghai. There's 26 million people in Shanghai, but they went there for the New Year celebration before the Chinese New Year, and the reported number was 35 people. But they say that were trampled to death.
Wow. That
literally because of the movement of people just they were crushed, and this was like a huge story. In fact, the people that were in charge of the quote unquote celebration were punished by the Chinese government because these people were there and they didn't have crowd control. So here the king says to his guy, "You're in charge of crowd control," and the crowd trampled him, and he died. I mean, it's just I don't know. It's amazing to me, but that actually happened in real time, that just from human movement, people actually died.
And the modern example I think of is, I don't know about the Chinese example, but the modern example I think of is you have like these soccer games.
Yeah.
Like in Europe this happens, and in England, where like they'll get pushed against the the fence and crushed.
Yeah,
and,
but I'm telling you, this just happened. You don't watch the news, Nehemia. This was international news.
I'm not sure they know about this outside of China.
But let me tell you what's funny. Not what's funny. So now for the New Year's celebration, they actually canceled the public event. They wouldn't have public fireworks. And this is a really big deal.
That's a very big deal in China.
One reason only, because of what happened in Shanghai. They shut down the ability, because the crowds, there's so many people that the movement you can't control. And I was not feeling well. I was going to go down there with my camera, and
oh boy,
I wasn't there. Anyway, but let's that actually took place.
Yeah.
So, I'm sorry. Verse that was a segue.
That was verse 19. And
was that 19?
Yeah, finished out with verse. Oh no, it was verse 17, 18, something like that.
Okay, so I want to read 18.
Well, 18 and 19 kind of just repeat what we read at the beginning,
okay.
Which is maybe why they decided to drop it, because they're like, we don't need to read this twice. But
okay, but should I read 19?
Sure, go ahead.
All right. So the officer had said to the man of God, "Look, even if the Lord should open the," and this is an example of rereading, like you say. It happened, it then happens, and then now we're back to him talking again?
Yeah.
He's dead.
We're reminding us what happened, yeah.
The officer had said to the man of God, "Look, even if the Lord should open the floodgates of the heavens, could this happen?" The man of God had replied, "You will see it with your own eyes, but you will not eat any of it." And this is exactly what happened to him, for the people trampled him in the gateway, and he died.
Yeah. Well,
wow.
I love two things about this prophecy and its fulfillment. First of all, what I love is that, this officer, this guy, he can't imagine how God's prophecy could be fulfilled. He's hearing this prophecy, and he's saying, well, if we could have all the rain in the world, we're still going to keep, there's not going to be,
supply and demand's not going to change like that.
No, well, how could that ever happen? And he can't imagine it, so he rejects God's word, because he can't imagine how it would be fulfilled. And I think that, to me, that's so important, because we'll read these prophecies in Daniel and Isaiah and these end times prophecies, and people will start coming up with all these allegorical, symbolic explanations. And they'll say, well, it can't literally mean Persia, because Persia is some second-rate country now. It's got to be the Soviet Union. I remember back in the 80s there was discussions like that. And now we've got, due to the incompetence of the American president, we have Iran purged to be a superpower again. That's Persia. So, but what I actually love how this prophecy was fulfilled in such a literal, yet it's an unexpected way. You've got so many discussions of prophecy that look for an abstract or symbolic fulfillments. And these tend to be like so flexible. There's no way to verify whether the prophet's speaking truth or not. It's one of those those prophecies that it's like a moving target. Oh, that wasn't fulfilled. Now let's change it to this. And it's almost like there's this hole that's shaped to fit the prophet's peg. He has a prophecy, and so they'll set up some situation where it's so flimsy. The prophecy will fit their interpretation. And the Torah gives us a standard to test prophecy, and Jeremiah fleshes out some of the details. We've talked about that. I think it's Jeremiah 28:7-9 and Deuteronomy 18:21-22. It's very simple. A good prophecy must come true. A bad prophecy can have a reprieve if the people repent. But if there's a prophecy of something good happening, it has to come true. So Elisha's saying that there's going to be this price situation in the gates of Samaria tomorrow. That had to come true, or Elisha would have been a false prophet. And you can't come along and saying, oh no, it didn't mean that. When he spoke about flour, it really meant something else.
Well, just a second. So wait a minute. I just realized something.
What's that?
You actually said that there was a prophecy from not that you said, but it was written in March 17th or something like that.
Right.
Oh, so we're like now. Of course, we're recording this in advance.
Right.
So if that prophecy comes to pass, people aren't even going to.
Well, this is the prophecy of these rabbinic Kabbalists of Rav Kaduri, who said apparently that Lake Michigan would sweep away Chicago with a tsunami, and there'd be lots of what do you call that
so
earthquakes.
If that hasn't happened,
if people actually hear this in April, then that means these Kabbalists are false prophets. If they don't hear it because the world has begun the end times, then I guess we were wrong.
Here's what's really amazing about this is we're actually recording this in advance, so people will still have the ability, if there's still technology, to listen to this, and who knows, we might be, who knows where we'll be. We don't know. I mean, if this is just true, that these people
You'll be up in heaven, I'll be left behind. Well, and here's what I say. You know what? Rav Kaduri could be telling the truth. I mean, he could be right. I don't say Yehovah can't do that. I don't say, even with the blood moons, I don't say Yehovah can't do that.
Right.
I just say, let's see if it happens. There's a prophecy of good happening.
Let me be clear. The blood moons, they're going to come and go.
Yeah.
They're going to come and go. Yeah. And then they're going to have to look for the next thing, okay? Because that's what people do. They don't focus on this. And I mean, look, we can have an argument about this, but I love the fact that you brought that example. How do you test it?
Right.
How do you test it? You actually can see it with your own eyes and say, did it happen or not? And what I don't understand about people is how these people can rise up out of the blue and say, on October 21st, such and such and such is going to happen. And it doesn't happen. And do you know that the next year that guy will say it again and people will follow him again? This happens over and over and over again. What is it about people's nature that they're sheeple following behind it? Just read it. If it doesn't happen, then don't follow that person anymore. How do people...
What he really meant when he said, the gate of Samaria.
Oh, okay.
He meant in thousands of years from... He didn't mean tomorrow, literally.
Oh.
He meant 1,000 years from now, because the day of the Lord is 1,000 years.
Okay.
And that's what Elisha really meant. No, he says tomorrow, it's got to be tomorrow.
Exactly. It's got to be tomorrow. Yeah. So anyway, and I don't want to be... I want to be sensitive to the people that do kind of find themselves getting caught up in this sort of thing. Because there might be that human nature that just says, I really do want to see that something's going to change, and I feel
it gives people hope.
Sense, and whatever it is. And so I understand
but is
that.
Is it a false hope?
Yeah, I think in many cases it is. I don't know why Yehovah would do this, give me 2 weeks and tell me, okay, prepare with this and be sick for the entire time.
He struck you with China-itis because you denied the 4 moons prophecy.
Yeah, right. Well, I'll tell you what, it makes me depend on him. And I really, again, I want to thank you, Nehemia, because you're here, you're exposed to it. It would be one thing if I'm across the world and you're across the world, but I'm sitting here talking in the microphone and all of a sudden, coughing, so hopefully you don't get sick. You better put your little hat back on. With that, let's pray.
He's making fun of this wonderful hat. Okay. Yehovah Avinu Shebashamayim, Yehovah our Father in heaven, I thank you for giving this opportunity for us to come together in your holy city, Jerusalem, here in the safe house on the side of the mountain, the place where you put your name forever in this city, to speak about the prophets.
Yes.
And Yehovah, I ask you to put in our hearts that when we get the good news, that we don't keep it to ourselves. That like the lepers, we say, Yehovah, we must let people know what that good news is, and let people know truth. And I love the image, Yehovah, that you've given of these lepers, because they don't force anybody to do anything, Yehovah. They just say, here's what we found out. And then the people themselves, they debate and they struggle with it, and they say, well, maybe this is true, maybe it's not true, maybe it's a trap. And in the end, they decide to step out on faith and go out and see the blessing that you've granted to the people. And Yehovah, I ask that you put it in my heart to trust in you, so I can go out and accept that good news and see what blessing you've given for my people, Yehovah. Yehovah, please give us the humility to come before you and read these prophecies and accept them, even if they're beyond our imagination.
Yes.
When we read about the dead rising and coming back to life, and I know there's people who hear that and they say, well, we've never seen that. How can that be? Can God really do that? Yehovah, please give us the humility to come before you and just accept what you've said and not allegorize it or turn it into symbology, but just accept what you've said and know that you are a true God, that you are the creator of the universe, and you are the one who has given us the blessing, Yehovah. Yes. And Yehovah, bless this endeavor that we're doing, and bless all those who are hearing these words and studying your scriptures. In your holy name, Yehovah. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you for listening to Prophet Pearls with Nehemia Gordon and Keith Johnson. For more information, please visit nehemiaswall.com and bfainternational.com.